0300 hours. Northern Baltic. Coordinate 58 degrees north. The silence of the freezing sea is shattered not by a blast but by a sudden drop in acoustic frequency. At T0, the strategic vessel known as the Adler, a heavy tonnage tanker operating within a non-transparent maritime network, experiences a catastrophic thermal failure in its primary propulsion system. On the infrared monitors of the regional Coast Guard, the vessel's heat signature begins to fade into the blue-black spectrum of the Arctic waters. This is the moment the kinetic equation changes. The Adler is no longer a mobile logistical asset. It is a drifting anomaly 1300 meters off a sovereign coastline, carrying a payload that exceeds the value of its declared cargo. While the vessel's crew issues a standard distress signal, the response from the nearby coastal command is anything but standard. There are no civilian tugboats dispatched. There are no diplomatic inquiries. Instead, the radar screens at the regional command center light up with the deployment of multiple CB-90 class high-speed interceptors. These are the sharp blades of the Special Operations Group, the SOG. Utilizing advanced C4 ISR protocols, the interceptors approach with their navigation lights deactivated, slicing through the salt spray at 40 knots. The mission is not rescue. It is a surgical boarding. The tactical reality of the Baltic is that it has become a high-definition sensor grid. Beneath the waves, a network of acoustic hydrophones records every rotation of a propeller. Above P8, Poseidon Maritime Patrol aircraft loiter at 300,000 feet, their synthetic aperture radars peeling back the steel skin of every merchant ship in the corridor. For years, the Eastern Command has utilized the freedom of navigation principle as a strategic shield, hiding what intelligence circles call floating Trojan horses, civilian disguised platforms filled with signals intelligence hardware, and paramilitary contractors. The Adler was a centerpiece of this shadow fleet, a multi-billion-dollar logistical lifeline designed to bypass global economic constraints. But at this specific coordinate, that shield has shattered. The engine failure provided the legal leverage for the environmental security doctrine. By claiming the vessel poses an immediate ecological risk to the sensitive Baltic ecosystem, the sovereign authorities move from observation to kinetic intervention. This is lawfare in its purest form, using international regulations as a tactical weapon to seize a strategic asset without firing a single shot. On the deck of the Adler, the confrontation is silent and clinical. SOG operators equipped with GPNVG-18, panoramic night vision, and suppressed HK-416 systems breach the bridge in under 45 seconds. They do not find standard merchant sailors. They encounter technical personnel with the discipline of professional operators, individuals linked to paramilitary structures, and intelligence directorates. The bridge is a chaotic hub of encrypted servers and satellite uplink terminals, none of which appear on the ship's official manifest. This is the failure of the billion-dollar invisibility strategy. The Adler, once believed to be a ghost ship moving through a gray zone of deniability, is now a captured data point. Every digital record, every encrypted log, and every hidden sensor ramp on its deck is now being archived by Western intelligence. The Baltic trap has closed, and the regional power's most secretive logistical network has just been exposed to the cold light of a Swedish winter. The strategic ripple effect is only beginning to spread. The capture of the Adler reveals a deeper layer of the modern battlefield, the integration of civilian logistical assets into a high-tech sensor network. To understand why this single mechanical failure caused a strategic tremor, one must analyze the technical specifications of the opposing forces. The primary interceptor in this theater is the Visby-class corvette. This vessel is a masterpiece of low observable technology. Its hull is constructed from carbon fiber reinforced plastic, a material that provides high structural integrity while significantly reducing the radar cross-section RCS. Every angle of the ship is engineered to deflect electromagnetic waves, making it virtually invisible to the standard AESA radar systems found on non-military vessels. When a Visby-class ship approaches, it does not appear as a warship on the monitor, it appears as a small, indistinct bird or a wave crest. This is the Ghost of the Baltic, a platform designed for the specific purpose of maritime interdiction in contested littoral waters. Against this stealth capability, the Adler and its sister ships in the Shadow Fleet are tactically defenseless. These are sitting ducks, massive, slow-moving steel structures with zero maneuverability and no kinetic defense systems. Their only protection was the gray zone of deniability. But once that deniability is stripped away, the physics of the environment take over. The Baltic Sea is not a vast open ocean. It is a series of narrow corridors and shallow basins. For a regional power attempting to move resources from its primary northern terminals to the global market, geography is the ultimate enemy. To reach the North Sea and the Atlantic, every vessel must navigate through a natural bottleneck, the Danish Straits, consisting of the Øresund, the Great Belt, and the Little Belt. In some sections of these straits, the shipping lanes are less than 3 miles wide. From a tactical perspective, this is a choke point. Modern military doctrine defines a choke point as a geographical feature that forces an adversary to concentrate their forces in a narrow area, making them highly vulnerable to surveillance and interdiction. In this case, the Shadow Fleet is under constant 24-hour observation. Beneath the surface, the sea floor is lined with SOSUS-style acoustic arrays, highly sensitive hydrophones that can identify a ship's unique propeller signature from hundreds of miles away. Above the waves, the airspace is dominated by P-8 Poseidon maritime patrol aircraft, which utilize multi-static active coherent Mach sensors to track underwater and surface movements simultaneously. The Adler's engine failure occurred in one of the most monitored maritime environments on the planet. The technical reality is that the Shadow Fleet was never truly invisible. It was merely tolerated. The shift in doctrine from passive observation to active intervention means that every technical flaw, a rusted hull, an uninsured engine, or a suspicious crew manifest is now a tactical opening for NATO-aligned forces. This is the environmental security trap. By utilizing the legal framework of ecological protection, sovereign authorities can now execute a risk blockade. They do not need to sink a ship to stop it. They simply need to prove that the ship is a technical liability. Furthermore, intelligence gathered from the Adler's bridge confirms the presence of modular UAV launch systems. These are pneumatic catapults capable of deploying Duran-class loitering munitions. By disguise these ramps as standard cargo cranes, the regional power transformed merchant vessels into hybrid warfare platforms. This technology allows for the launch of drone swarms from unpredictable locations, creating a low-intensity threat against European coastal infrastructure. However, the capture of the Adler has turned this Trojan horse strategy into a liability. The specialized hardware found on board provides a digital roadmap of the entire Shadow network, allowing analysts to predict the movement of every other disguised asset in the fleet. The cage has not only been locked, it has been wired with high-definition sensors that make further gray zone operations nearly impossible to execute without immediate detection and neutralization. The seizure of the Adler marks a transition from kinetic interdiction to a more lethal form of engagement, fiscal strangulation. In the physics of global commerce, energy is the fuel, but insurance is the oxygen. Without valid protection and indemnity coverage known as P&I insurance, a vessel is effectively paralyzed. It cannot legally enter any reputable international port, it cannot secure letters of credit from global banking institutions, and it cannot navigate through regulated straits without incurring massive legal liabilities. The Adler incident has triggered a catastrophic re-rating of the entire Shadow Fleet. For the dominant insurance clusters in London and New York, these vessels have been reclassified from high-risk to toxic asset status. This is not merely a bureaucratic change. It is a systematic exclusion from the global maritime infrastructure. The logic of this economic weapon is built on the concept of risk premiums. When a sovereign entity's fleet is caught utilizing civilian vessels for paramilitary operations, the cost of operating that fleet escalates exponentially. Freight rates for non-compliant vessels have entered a vertical trajectory. The regional power created this shadow infrastructure to bypass a $60 per barrel price cap. Yet the rising costs of bribes, clandestine, ship-to-ship transfers, and extreme insurance premiums are now consuming the profit margins. On paper, the energy is being sold. In reality, the revenue is vanishing into a logistical black hole. This is the strangulation strategy in its advanced phase, a scenario where a nation is forced to expend more capital to export its resources than it receives in return. Simultaneously, the regulatory response from central administrative bodies has accelerated. Following the data breach on the Adler, 41 additional vessels were instantly integrated into a global blacklist. The total number of sanctioned or restricted ships is now approaching the critical threshold of 600 units. This represents the majority of the regional power's independent maritime capacity. When a ship is blacklisted, its digital identity is flagged across every port management system in the Western Hemisphere. It becomes a pariah of the seas. This creates a risk blockade, which is far more efficient than a physical naval blockade. A physical blockade requires a massive deployment of warships and carries a high risk of direct kinetic escalation. A risk blockade, however, utilizes the existing framework of international law and financial systems to achieve the same result: the total immobilization of an adversary's logistical lines. The strategic ripple effect extends to the very heart of the regional power's economy. As the Baltic cage tightens, the reliance on these gray zone assets becomes a source of extreme vulnerability. Every turn of a propeller is now a gamble against a preemptive intervention. The regional power is entering an absurd economic cycle, a spiral of chaos where it continues to produce and ship energy assets, while its national treasury experiences a net loss due to the sheer cost of maintaining a clandestine supply chain. The message sent from the cold waters of the Baltic is clear: the era of utilizing commercial invisibility as a strategic shield has ended. The seas are no longer a neutral highway for trade. They have been transformed into a transparent, high-stakes minefield, where the primary weapon is a digital ledger. The physical boarding of the Adler by the Special Operations Group was merely the opening phase of a deeper intelligence harvest. While the vessel's exterior projected the image of a neglected mid-century tanker, the internal architecture told a different story. Upon securing the main deck and cargo holds, technical specialists identified several anomalies in the ship's structural configuration. Disguised within the housing of standard hydraulic cargo cranes were high-pressure pneumatic catapult systems. These are not tools for maritime commerce. They are specialized launch platforms designed for Group 3 Unmanned Aerial Systems (UAS). By utilizing a pneumatic launch mechanism, these civilian ships can deploy long-range loitering munitions without the need for a visible runway or traditional military superstructure. This allows the regional power to conduct low-intensity operations against coastal infrastructure while maintaining a plausible layer of deniability. The technical implications of this discovery are profound. Each of these launch ramps is integrated into a modular command and control C2 suite hidden within the vessel's engine room and bridge. Intelligence analysts retrieved several hardened server units containing encrypted flight paths that bypass traditional air defense zones. These digital footprints suggest that the Adler was not just a cargo carrier, but a mobile intelligence gathering and strike platform, a floating command hub. The presence of signals intelligence SIGINT arrays disguised as standard maritime satellite antennas allowed the vessel to monitor and intercept localized communications from nearby NATO-aligned coastal facilities. This data was then transmitted via encrypted burst signals to centralized military directorates, effectively turning a commercial ship into a forward-deployed node in a hybrid warfare network. Further forensic analysis of the onboard digital records revealed a direct link to high-ranking operational planners, often referred to as ghost personnel. Among the encrypted logs were communications involving specialized units tasked with clandestine overseas activities. These units, disguised as private security or technical contractors, were found to be in control of the ship's primary navigation and communication systems, often overriding the civilian captain's authority. This ghost crew mechanism ensures that the vessel remains under strict strategic control, moving in accordance with the tactical requirements of the regional power rather than the laws of international trade. The discovery of these drone ramps and digital spying equipment on the Adler provides the smoking gun required to redefine the legal status of the entire Shadow fleet. It proves that these vessels are not innocent merchant ships caught in an economic dispute, but active combatants in a gray zone conflict. The integration of kinetic strike capabilities into the global supply chain represents a significant escalation in maritime doctrine. By weaponizing the very vessels that sustain global trade, the regional power has forced a total re-evaluation of maritime security. Every rusted tanker in the Baltic is now viewed through a lens of potential threat, necessitating a permanent shift in how coastal sovereign states monitor, board, and neutralize suspicious logistical assets. The data extracted from the Adler's servers has provided a comprehensive map of this hidden infrastructure, turning a secret weapon into a primary strategic liability. The strategic fallout of the Adler incident extends far beyond the icy corridors of the Baltic Sea. In the chambers of global power, specifically within the Indo-Pacific command structures, the seizure of a disguised logistical asset is being analyzed as a proof of concept for a new era of maritime interdiction. The primary observer of this shift is Beijing. For years, the maritime strategy in the South China Sea has relied on a similar architecture of gray zone warfare, utilizing massive paramilitary fishing fleets known as the professionalized maritime militia to assert territorial claims, without triggering a direct naval confrontation. These vessels, much like the Russian Shadow Fleet, operate under the guise of commercial activity while being integrated into a centralized military C4 ISR network. The tactical lesson from the Baltic is clear: the West has successfully weaponized environmental security and technical non-compliance to bypass the traditional hurdles of international maritime law. This creates a significant strategic dilemma for any power relying on asymmetric maritime assets. If a rusted tanker in the Baltic can be boarded and seized under the pretext of ecological risk, then a maritime militia vessel obstructing international shipping lanes in the South China Sea can be subjected to the same doctrine. The Adler case has effectively neutralized the civilian shield. It demonstrates that when a commercial vessel is integrated into a military objective, its sovereign immunity is no longer a guaranteed protection. This shift signals the weaponization of commerce on a global scale. For decades, the globalized economy was built on the assumption that merchant shipping was a neutral, untouchable infrastructure. However, the discovery of drone launch systems and SIGINT arrays on the Adler proves that the line between a trader and a combatant has been erased. In response, Western maritime doctrine is moving toward a policy of total transparency. This involves the deployment of high-altitude, long-endurance HAIL UAVs and integrated satellite constellations that can track the digital twin of every significant vessel on the ocean in real time. Any deviation from a standard commercial profile, such as unexpected course, changes the disabling of AIS. Automatic Identification System transponders or suspicious hull modifications now triggers an immediate escalation in the risk. Assessment. The global domino effect is also manifesting in the insurance and financial sectors. Global P&I clubs are now evaluating geopolitical risk with the same clinical precision as they evaluate storm damage or mechanical failure. The precedent set by the European Union's blacklist and Sweden's tactical intervention has turned the shadow fleet model into a toxic asset globally. This creates a massive financial barrier for any nation attempting to run a clandestine logistical network. The cost of invisible trade is becoming higher than the value of the trade itself. As the Baltic trap tightens, it serves as a stark warning to any global power attempting to use commercial interdependence as a cloak for strategic expansion. The message from Stockholm to Beijing is identical. The commercial cover no longer protects the military objective, and the seas are transforming into a transparent battlefield, where every ship is a recorded data point in an inescapable global ledger. While the tactical interdiction of the Adler took place in the littoral waters of the Baltic, a parallel force was operating from 1,000 miles away, fundamentally altering the survival logic of the Shadow fleet. This is the Ukrainian Shadow. Modern warfare has entered an era of asynchronous engagement where low-cost, long-range loitering munitions can neutralize billion-dollar energy infrastructures. The strikes against the St. Petersburg refinery and the Primorsk oil terminal were not merely symbolic, they were clinical applications of asymmetric doctrine. Utilizing kamikaze UAVs constructed from composite materials to minimize radar cross-sections, these platforms targeted the most vulnerable nodes of the regional power's export machine, the distillation columns and the fuel storage. Tanks? The physics of these strikes reveal a devastating cost-exchange ratio. A drone costing less than $50,000, powered by a simple internal combustion engine and guided by a combination of GNSS and inertial navigation, can travel over 1,200 kilometers to strike a target that generates billions in annual revenue. When these UAVs impact a refinery, they trigger a chain reaction of thermal energy. A refinery is a highly pressurized chemical environment. Once the primary distillation unit is compromised, the facility becomes a liability rather than an asset. The St. Petersburg and Kirishi refineries, the primary fuel sources for the Shadow Fleet's logistical chain, were effectively neutralized, forcing the regional power to divert its dwindling resources to domestic repair rather than international. Export. This aerial threat creates a persistent risk environment in the Gulf of Finland, the narrowest point of the Baltic. For a Shadow Fleet tanker which lacks any form of CIWS, close-in weapon system, or electronic warfare suite, a slow-moving drone is a lethal predator. These tankers are sitting ducks. They are slow, possess massive thermal and visual signatures, and require hours to maneuver out of a strike zone. The reality of the Baltic trap is that Ukraine does not need to sink every tanker. It only needs to prove that the tankers are within a proven strike zone. In the world of global maritime trade, the mere existence of a credible threat is as effective as a physical blockade. Once a region is classified as an active war zone by maritime intelligence agencies, the commercial logic collapses. No legitimate captain will sail into a bottleneck where kamikaze drones are active, and no insurance provider will underwrite the journey. The Ukrainian shadow has turned the Baltic from a secure backyard into a firing range. This is the ultimate strategic squeeze. A regional power's economic heart is being targeted by high-precision, low-cost technology, while its maritime escape route is being closed by the legal and tactical weight of a sovereign coastline. The synergy between the physical seizure of vessels like the Adler and the aerial neutralization of the refineries has created a total paralysis of the energy logistical chain. The strategic fallout of the Adler seizure has triggered a tectonic shift in the architecture of global energy trade. We are witnessing the emergence of a spiral of chaos, a logistical phenomenon where the cost of bypassing international regulations exceeds the economic value of the commodity being transported. When a shadow fleet is identified, its operational environment transforms from a free market highway into a high-friction zone of exclusion. Every vessel associated with the compromised network now faces a mandatory risk surcharge. This surcharge is not a single fee, but a cumulative burden involving inflated freight rates, the high cost of clandestine ship-to-ship transfers in international waters, and the necessity of utilizing dark ports facilities that operate outside the standard transparency of global maritime logistics. The clinical reality is that the regional power's profit margin on energy exports is being decimated by these logistical overheads. While the volume of oil leaving the terminals may remain steady, the net revenue returning to the national treasury is in a state of terminal decline. This is the logistical black hole. To maintain the illusion of economic resilience, the regional power is forced to subsidize its own exports, effectively paying a premium to move its resources through an increasingly hostile maritime landscape. This creates an unsustainable economic model where the nation's primary source of capital becomes a drain on its remaining reserves. Beyond the immediate fiscal impact, the Adler incident has catalyzed a permanent fragmentation of the global maritime market. We are now seeing the development of a two-tier system. On one side is the transparent market governed by established P&I clubs' digital vessel tracking and strict adherence to environmental safety protocols. On the other is the gray market, a fragmented network of aging, uninsured, and technically deficient vessels operating in the shadows of international law. However, the Adler case proves that the border between these two tiers is no longer porous. The preemptive intervention strategy adopted by coastal sovereign states means that any vessel attempting to transition from the gray market to the transparent market for logistics or supplies is immediately flagged and neutralized. This fragmentation has profound implications for global energy security. As the shadow fleet is squeezed out of the Baltic and redirected to longer, more expensive routes around the Cape of Good Hope, the global supply chain experiences increased latency. This latency translates to volatility in the energy markets. However, unlike traditional supply shocks caused by production cuts, this logistical shock is localized to the regional power's specific export capacity. The global market is adapting by accelerating the diversification of supply sources, further isolating the regional power and making its energy assets toxic to long-term institutional buyers. The message to the global financial system is definitive. The weaponization of commerce is a double-edged sword. While it allowed a regional power to maintain short-term liquidity, the long-term consequence is the total erosion of its maritime sovereignty. The seas are being reordered according to a new set of digital and legal protocols where invisibility is no longer an option. Every transaction, every vessel movement, and every insurance policy is now a data point in a global security ledger. The Adler was the catalyst for this transformation, turning a single mechanical failure into a global demonstration of how economic asphyxiation is executed in the 21st century. The final verdict of this strategic simulation is clear. The era of the Invisible Armada has reached its terminal point. For nearly a century, the foundational principle of maritime strategy was freedom of navigation, a legal framework designed to protect global commerce from state interference. However, the regional power's decision to weaponize this freedom, integrating intelligence arrays and strike platforms into civilian hulls, has forced a fundamental rewrite of the global rules of engagement. We are now entering an era of total domain awareness where the ocean is no longer a dark space of deniability, but a high-definition, transparent battlefield. The failure of the Shadow Fleet on that cold night in December demonstrates the inherent limits of hybrid warfare. When an asymmetric strategy relies on the exploitation of international norms, it creates a single catastrophic point of failure. Once those norms are redefined or suspended, the entire strategy collapses. The regional power banked on Western hesitation, the fear of escalation, and the rigid commitment to diplomatic courtesy. But the Adler incident proved that sovereign coastal states have discovered a more effective countermeasure: the strategic application of lawfare. By utilizing environmental and technical standards as tactical weapons, coastal commands can neutralize a strategic threat without the political or kinetic fallout of a direct military strike. From a military perspective, the Baltic Trap serves as a masterclass in littoral interdiction. It proves that in a confined maritime environment, technical superiority and sensor integration are far more decisive than the sheer volume of tonnage. The Visby-class stealth corvette and the P-8 Poseidon are not just isolated platforms. They are active nodes in a digital net that can detect, track, and trap even the most elusive ghost ship. The lesson for future strategic planners is that invisibility is a temporary tactical advantage. In a world of ubiquitous satellite surveillance and integrated underwater sensor arrays, the only true defense for maritime logistics is transparency and compliance with the established international order. The human element of this strategic failure is often overshadowed by the technical data in command centers. For the crews of these shadow vessels, individuals often operating without the legal protection of a sovereign navy or the safety standards of a legitimate merchant fleet, the sea has become a high-risk minefield. They are the expendable assets of a gray zone conflict trapped between the rigid, uncompromising demands of a central directorate and the tightening net of a global maritime security doctrine. The Adler's engine failure was a mechanical event, but its consequences are a human and strategic tragedy, signaling the end of an era where commerce could be used as a convenient cloak for strategic aggression. The seas are being remapped not by explorers, but by the clinical logic of integrated security systems. The tactical intervention in the Baltic has established a permanent precedent that is now rippling across every contested maritime corridor on the planet. This is the birth of the total transparency doctrine. Strategic observers in the Indo-Pacific are closely documenting how a sovereign coastal state successfully utilized technical non-compliance to neutralize a disguised military threat. In the South China Sea, where massive fleets of fishing militias have long been used to assert territorial control under a civilian veneer, the Adler incident serves as a strategic warning. The civilian shield that once protected these asymmetric assets is dissolving. Future maritime security will not be defined by the size of a nation's traditional navy, but by its ability to integrate legal, environmental, and technical data into a preemptive interdiction strategy. By the end of this decade, we project that the concept of invisible trade will be entirely obsolete. Global powers are already accelerating the deployment of low Earth orbit LEO satellite constellations specifically designed for persistent maritime surveillance. These systems utilize hyperspectral imaging and AI-driven behavior analysis to identify any vessel that deviates from a standard commercial profile. An unexpected engine slowdown, a suspicious ship-to-ship transfer, or a modification in hull depth will automatically trigger a risk alert across integrated command centers. The ocean is becoming a high-resolution digital grid, where every move is tracked, recorded, and analyzed for strategic intent. The future of maritime conflict will be fought in this gray zone of data and law. We are moving toward a reality where autonomous interdiction becomes the norm. Unmanned surface vessels equipped with non-kinetic neutralizing systems and high-definition sensors will be the first responders to any logistical anomaly. These platforms can loiter in high-risk bottlenecks for months, providing a constant low-cost risk blockade that physical navies cannot match. For any regional power relying on clandestine supply chains, the cost of survival is becoming prohibitive. The strategic strangulation witnessed in the Baltic is merely the prototype for a global system of maritime exclusion. This global shift is forcing a massive reconfiguration of national interests. Nations that once relied on global interdependence as a safeguard are now retreating into resilient logistics, shortening their supply chains and prioritizing secure, transparent trade corridors over the cheap, high-risk routes of the past. The Adler was the catalyst for this fragmentation. It proved that in the modern era, a single mechanical failure on a Rice-D tanker can spark a global reconfiguration of power. The world is transitioning from an era of open, unregulated seas to a new paradigm of secured sovereignty, where the price of entry is total visibility and absolute compliance with a digital world order. The case of the Adler is more than a story of mechanical failure in the freezing waters of the Baltic. It is a monument to the end of a specific era of strategic deception. As the vessel is towed into a secure, high-surveillance port, it leaves behind a wake of collapsed doctrines and shattered economic lifelines. The Shadow Fleet, once believed to be the ultimate asymmetric weapon against global financial pressure, has been exposed as a fragile and high-risk liability. The billion-dollar strategy of concealment has been defeated not by superior firepower but by the clinical application of integrated sensor data and international maritime law. This simulation reveals that the true superweapon of the 21st century is not a missile or a stealth jet, but total domain awareness. When every vessel is a data point and every logistical movement is recorded in a transparent digital ledger, the very concept of a gray zone begins to evaporate. For any regional power, the lesson of the Baltic trap is definitive: economic sovereignty cannot be maintained through clandestine networks in an age of ubiquitous surveillance. The transition from the freedom of navigation to secured and transparent commerce is an irreversible evolution of global order. In the final assessment, the Adler incident has redefined the boundaries of national security. The line between a civilian merchant ship and a military combatant has been permanently erased. The seas, once the great highways of unregulated trade, have been transformed into a transparent, monitored battlefield, where the primary currency is trust and compliance. Those who attempt to weaponize the global supply chain will find themselves trapped within it. The message rising from the cold waters of the Baltic, echoed in the corridors of power from Brussels to Washington, is uncompromising. The commercial cover is dead, and the era of invisible trade has been consigned to history. The content presented in this video is a strategic what-if simulation generated through advanced AI analysis of geopolitical data, military doctrine, and maritime law. The events, scenarios, and tactical breakdowns described are for analytical and educational purposes and do not represent 100% confirmed real-time intelligence or official news reporting. This simulation serves as a strategic model to explore the potential consequences of current global tensions and should be understood as a hypothetical projection of modern warfare and economic strategy.